I want to thank you all for joining us in this conversation that we're having on the upcoming Georgia runoff election. As many of you know, coming out of November the 5th, we have 2 Senate seats remaining in the entire country, and both of those are in Georgia. We have the opportunity down here in Georgia to decide what the balance of power is going to be in the Senate, who are going to be our representatives, and who really is going to be the leader of the Senate, who will be able to pass cabinet positions, federal court judges, and clear out that backlog. I'm Attorney Robert Patillo. I'm the Southeastern Regional Director from the Rainbow PUSH Coalition, and we're having this conversation today with an esteemed panel. We have President of the Georgia NAACP, we have Rev.James Woodall, and also we have former candidate for Secretary of State and former state representative for the state of Georgia, Dee Dawkins-Haigler. Thank you all so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having us, Robert. It's great to be with you and Rainbow Push as always.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me as well. I look forward to sharing where I can as it relates to pushing our people to the polls. And just a small correction, is more on the ballot than just the balance of power. It's about people's lives, and we want to make sure we lift up the voices of the people that are found here in the state of Georgia so that we can do what we need to do for our communities and ultimately our state.
All right, and James, I want you to extrapolate that on that a little bit, because we have the Senate races, we have the Public Service Commissioner race, we have the unexpired term of John Lewis on the ballot, we have state Senate seats, but more so we have a battle for the nation's very soul. Whether or not Trumpism will survive for another 4 years going into 2022, or we'll have the opportunity to move forward a progressive agenda. So kind of talk about what's at stake in this election.
You know, when you talk to voters throughout the state of Georgia, primarily outside of the Metro Atlanta area, but even in the Metro Atlanta area, folks care less about Democrat versus Republican. They care about being able to turn on their water faucet and be able to ensure that the water that they drink is clean, that the air that they breathe is that is not contaminated, right? They care about, during a public health pandemic, that the elected officials who have been appointed and elected to serve, especially in the Senate, to be able to get some kind of relief so that when they're laid off because they can't work because of the coronavirus, whether or not they've gotten it or somebody else has gotten it, they want to be able to trust that those who have been elected to help these people, to serve the common good, that they're not going to be more invested in profits on the stock market than they are themselves. And so this is what our voters are showing up for. And I believe that we're going to be able to do it again so that we can ensure that everybody has access to the kinds of life and liberty and pursuit of happiness that we got so accustomed to being promised, but not ever actually receiving.
Absolutely. Dee, I want to toss over to you, because we're having this national conversation now on voter suppression, on counting ballots, on what's being done to ensure that we have free and fair elections. When you were running for Secretary of State, you were pushing many of these issues, 4 years ago, 8 years ago, 10 years ago, you were on this issue. So can you kind of describe this battle that we've had in Georgia to get to the place where we are now, and how far we have to go to ensure free and fair elections?
Mm-hmm. And thank you for that question, Robert. So we have been battling this in Georgia for quite a while now. Many organizations, the late Dr. Joseph Lowry was one of the spearheaded, as well as Dr. James Orange, Dr. C.T. Vivian. And of course, there are many of us, Helen Butler still here, the late Rita Samuels, because Georgia has been suppressing votes for a long time. As a matter of fact, it started under Karen Hamill's administration as Secretary of State. When she resigned to go on to run for Congress, for other office, then Brian Kemp stepped in, and under Brian Kemp, we had millions of people that were purged from the voter files in Georgia. And so we have been having this up and down relationship, or if you will, of trying to get voters back on the voter file, as well as getting the Republicans to understand that democracy is something that should be available to all people. And when you suppress votes, which they don't think purging people from the files is voter suppression, they feel, because they know demographics are changing, it's voter suppression nonetheless. So we know that because the Voting Rights Act was gutted, Section 4, Section 5, this is giving them carte blanche to act a straight, complete fool in Georgia. And so we're seeing the remnants of that now. And so we have whether it was in Quitman, Georgia, or Hancock, Georgia, Macon, and all across the state, we have seen blatant, downright voter suppression in the forms of voter intimidation, in the form of voter confusion. And so now here we are in 2020, but a lot of people thought it started in 2018, but it did not. It started right at around 2008, and here we are 12 years later.
Hey, and with that, we had the Georgia voter ID law that was back in 04, 05, 06, that period of time. Then they wanted to charge $10 for you to get a state issued voter ID. The federal court struck that down as being a poll tax. Then they took us into 2008. And I think we haven't had an African-American elected statewide in Georgia since right around then, since Thurber Baker and Michael Thurman. I think that was right around that 2008 time period. So despite the demographics of the state changing, having 35% African-Americans, 11 to 12% Hispanic, 5% Asian, 52% women, we are still have a constitutional majority for Republicans in the House and the Senate, all statewide elected offices, the governor's mansion, and including the state court of appeals and the state Supreme Court. So they are in complete control of the state. But even despite that, you have a civil war going on within their party where they're accusing each other of voter suppression. Back over to James. James, can you kind of talk about the importance of this Senate race and how we can get more people excited and informed about the runoff? Because it's a very strange thing we do in Georgia to have a runoff at a Senate election. But can you kind of talk about that a little bit, what we need to do to drive that vote out on January the 5th?
What we're seeing right now is nothing short of racism and white supremacy. The issues, ourselves against the kind of attacks that we're seeing on a very large scale. And then secondly, we got to make sure that our people know, that everything is happening, the dates. One of the things that the Georgia NAACP is doing with the partnership with one of our groups is that we're going to be sending out absentee ballot request forms to literally every single voter that voted both in person and by mail in this past general election. And then we're also going to send out to other folks like that, and contact them, blow their phone up. I know a lot of folks get upset and don't want to have that, but we want to make sure our people know what is happening, because if they don't know, then they're not going to show up. And we can't expect, for us to just, go on CNN and MSNBC and talk about it. We need to go into these smaller communities that folks who don't necessarily watch this all day, every day. We need to talk about their issues, why this is important to them, and not just make it about, the national headlines and the national platform, because that's not going to turn our people out.
And on that point, James, we have, let's say, the Jeezy versus Gucci versus that's coming up this week. We have Lil Wayne versus T.I. coming up later on next month. We have a culture in Atlanta which is very celebrity and pop culture based. How can we get those people motivated and activated to just tweet out to your millions of followers about the early vote, or the early voting date of December the 14th, or the voter registration deadline December 7th, requesting an absentee ballot, which can be done now? How can we motivate those people to get involved on those sorts of things?
Well, I don't know if our position should be, how do we get celebrities to mobilize our voters? Like, our voters, we know for a fact that when we talk to the people who are trusted in these communities, celebrities are great, but let's get the trusted leadership, especially in South and rural Georgia, clergy, right? Business leaders, elected officials on a local level. Like, we spend so much time trying to mobilize celebrities and we don't lift up the people. Like, people win elections, not celebrities, not headlines, not television ads and commercials. People. We need to spend majority of our time mobilizing our communities around the issues so that they can show up and show out. Now, let's be very clear about something. We want them to show up and show out because we have an intended outcome of this election, because we know for us what it means for us. But that's not going to mobilize them. We need to talk about the issues that the people are talking about, lift up their voices so that they tell us what's going to happen. Because what the people want, we the people, that's what makes America the democracy that we know it can be. If we lift up that. But if we're trying to do everything else and try to convince them that what we want them to do is what is in their best interest, we lose. But if we lift up what they're telling us they want, that they need, that they're experiencing, I guarantee you, you won't have to convince a single soul to do anything, because they'll already be there. That's what we saw in this past general election, the most record turnout we've ever experienced, right? And we did that because we lifted up the issues. Communities came out in droves. They understood what was at stake. And we just got to do it again.
Absolutely.
And we are going to do it again.
Absolutely. Dee, before the general election, yourself and the Deltas and other civic groups, you knocked on 200,000 doors across the state. Going into the January 5th election, you know, we have a couple stumbling blocks. We have Thanksgiving coming up. We have Christmas. We have New Year's. We have the weather changing where it's going to be a lot colder and a lot more difficult to get people out. How can we mobilize people in this current circumstance? Because normally turnout for a runoff election is right at 10%. So 5 million people voting, that's 500,000 people. And that means 250,000 people could decide to balance of power in the Senate. How can we make sure that we are reaching people wherever they are?
And that's a good question, Robert. So first of all, it was so many different groups that went out and mobilized during the general primary. But one group in particular that I was working with was Ground Grain International and Power Pack, Black Pack. And so what we did was, I was a state director. I kept it on the low because loose lips sink ships. And we did nothing but rural areas. So we had offices in Augusta, Savannah, Columbus, Albany, Valdosta. And then we did little cities all around the Black Belt, from Camilla to Cairo to Quitman. And not only do we have offices, we had employees on the ground. I had over 200 employees just on the ground, paid employees, knocking on doors when everybody else was texting and tweeting and calling. I had people on the doors. And the reason why I didn't publicize it is because I said, if the Republicans know that I have people on the ground in South Georgia, then they're going to mobilize and get people on the ground. And sometimes you got to be strategic with all of this. And so right now, we still have people on the grounds. I was in Columbus yesterday checking on our offices to make sure people are out. Augusta the day before. And so we've got to keep that momentum up. But people do what they want to do, Robert. See, that's the key. If people can stand in line and do whatever they used to do on Black Friday, surely we can motivate the masses to get back to the polls because our very lives depend on it. Now, the Delta's also, the whole entire D9 now has a grant, different grants, like Black Voters Matters is giving grants out to get people mobilized and in the streets. My chapter is actually the housing funds right now for the Deltas to mobilize across most of the state. And so I want to thank Black Voters Matters for that. But we have to be intentional, Robert. See, this is not about one individual. Now, of course, it's important to Georgia because there are a lot of issues that are salient to us. But we are also could be the stop wall for all of the Senate. So a lot rests on Georgia. And because it does, we have all of these people coming to Georgia, saying they want to be, consultants. They don't know Georgia. Hell, half the Black people in Georgia, in the metro, don't know Georgia. I mean, you have to have people who understand South Georgia or the state working the entire state in different parts. And I don't need a white consultant trying to tell me how to mobilize our people. We know how to mobilize. If we want to do something, give us the money. Like the NAACP people had people out as well, because I've seen some of them out when my people were out in Cobb and Gwinnett. But when you give people money, then we know what to do with our money. We don't need a babysitter. Hell, we know what to do. We always know how to organize. Black people are the kings and queens of organizing, especially like Rainbow Push. We know what to do. And so we're going to get them back out because we're going to, we've hit the churches. The first go rounds, I utilized the Black church. I got, because that phase, voting and GOT, the first phase I did nonpartisan. So I made sure I got all of the churches that I could involved across the state. I had thousands of churches involved. And so when we do what we know how to do, we win. Now back to that thing Jane said about celebrities. Celebrities do have sway. You could be a celebrity just by being a politician, because we have some people now who fall into the celebrity status and people will do whatever they say or believe that whatever they say have, is turned,
D is one of them.
Yeah, Dee is famous. I'm trying to be like her when I
tell
grow
James
up.
what all you want to, but I'm just saying, we've got to harness that energy. I don't mind them telling people to go vote. I just don't need them talking about too many issues, because we see how that went south with some of them on this presidential election. But they can use their celebrity to push the vote out. What else they doing? I mean, you got millions of followers. You need to be tweeting and getting on phone and doing Facebook Lives and Instagrams and Snapchat. You need to do something with your celebrity other than just having celebrity and making money. I mean, do something with your celebrity. Now, I'm not gonna be hard on them like, President Obama, but that's the story for another day. Catch me on another day, we're gonna talk about that.
All right, now James, one of the things I think both of our organizations are working on is this concept of in custody voting for people who are currently in custody in county jails who have not been convicted of a felony, who are able to be registered and able to vote. Can you kind of talk about the work you guys did out in DeKalb County and how we can replicate that across the state?
Well, part of that is communication and building relationships with elected officials. Sheriff Maddox there in DeKalb County is a amazing partner with the DeKalb NAACP and thus the Georgia NAACP, and being able to ensure that every single resident at that jail is able to exercise their right. And so building those relationships across the board is going to be critical and key, because they shouldn't be disenfranchised. One, they shouldn't be in jail to begin with. That's a whole nother conversation. But if they're there as residents, they need to be able to exercise their right to vote. So Sheriff Maddox agreed, and they worked with the branch to ensure that every single resident there was able to have a mail-in ballot to be able to submit and mail that back in time for it to be processed for the election. I don't know what the return of the return rate was as it was handled on the local level. But what I do know is, again, like, I want to celebrate our local leadership to Dee's point. It's local folks getting this stuff done. People who have done this for years. This isn't new. We don't need consultants coming out telling us how to get it done. We already know the formula. Like, even in a general election, we had the NAACP, we said we blacked Georgia out. Some other folks said we blew Georgia out. Or some others say we joled Georgia or whatever. But regardless of whatever we did, we know that there wasn't a lot of funding invested in Georgia this election. And you saw what we were able to do. Just imagine what happens if we have full investment from the top down, from the bottom up, and putting money and resources into the hands of people who know how to mobilize. Because what I'm gonna see in this election cycle is that we're gonna see a whole bunch of millions of dollars flowing into the pockets of folks who don't need it, who ain't never been to Georgia, who ain't never organized in Georgia, and who ain't never delivered the kind of results that we need to see happen. But you know who has? Us Georgia organizers. And we done did it before.
It's interesting you say that because Dee's going to remember this election back in 2010 when Roy Barnes was running for his comeback against Deal. I was running the AG's race that cycle, and we saw millions of dollars flow into that race for the governor's seat because we knew it was going to be close, and they spent it all on television ads and bad commercials and none on the field game, none on the ground game. We from the AG's race, being the third spot down, were working for far smaller budget. So I got in my Volkswagen Jetta and I drove to all 159 counties, knocked on doors, talked to churches, talked to organizers, and we got more votes from the third seat, from the attorney general seat, than the governor's race or the lieutenant governor's race got that year, because Georgia is a ground game state. So with that, Dee, what advice would you give to people who are listening to this from outside of the South, outside of Atlanta, who want to be involved? And who want to be involved and want to contribute? Should they do letter writing, text banking, phone banking, partner? What should they be doing to help out?
They should be sending money to organizations that organize in Georgia, or they can come and volunteer with organizations that work in Georgia under the direction of people who organize in Georgia. So your money and your body is fine if you're going to come and work and be directed. A lot of people don't want to go and knock on doors right now. Like, I have people, yesterday we were out knocking on doors. I was in Columbus knocking on doors, making sure my team knew exactly what to do. A lot of people don't want to do the hard work. They just want the cute work. But right now we need their dollars. We need their money. And this is why I work with Ground Game. And right now I'm organizing for Black PAC, because we need people who understand Georgia and are willing to put the hard work in. I mean, I'm telling you, the reason, this is what I believe. I believe because of all those organizations that were led by Black people collectively working together is why Biden was able to win Georgia. There is no other reason. If people say what they want to say, it had nothing to do with nothing else but Black folk organizing Black folk to get out the vote. That's all it was. And so we've got to keep that momentum up.
All right, same for you, James. What are some things we should be working on, and for people who are outside of Georgia, because we're going to be playing this all over the country. If you want to get involved around the country, what should you be doing other than hopping on the next Spirit flight down to Hartsfield Jackson and just kind of wandering around, knocking on doors or something? What should people be doing?
There's ample opportunity, but of course, you're more than welcome to join us at the Georgia NAACP. And if not, we're probably already working with Rainbow Push and Black PAC and Collective PAC and all of the other PACs to make sure that we get this job done, because our future is at stake. Our lives are at stake. Our communities are at stake. And even as a preacher, I can say this. Matter of fact, I think we all preach it. The legacy of our God is at stake.
That's
Right? Literally. And so this is an act of righteous indignation to let our people breathe, because it says, let everything that has breath praise you, the Lord. So if God ain't getting praised, then I got a problem with that.
See, y'all the preachers. I'm just here to be
Amen.
saved. All right, I think that's a good place. Before we end, please give out any contact information for yourself or organizations that people need to be getting in contact with, and also any final thoughts for our audience who are outside of Georgia that want to get involved. And I'll start with Dee.
Okay, well, James already did NAACP because I was going to do that, but make sure it's the Georgia NAACP. And then I'm going to give a special shout out for the DeKalb NAACP with my president, Teresa Hardy, but Georgia NAACP. But you got to make sure you give to Black PAC. You got to give to the Georgia Coalition for the People's Agenda. You need to give to the New Georgia Project. You need to give to Black Voters Matter. I mean, I can just go down the list, but whatever you do, find some reputable Black organizations and give your money to. Please, 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 please. And don't forget the churches. Sometimes we forget the churches. They do mobilizing and organizing too, even though it's nonpartisan. Like all of our groups are nonpartisan. They need money as well to continue to get out the work to their parishioners. So I just want to remind everybody to the text, and remember, James, Reverend Woodall said, you got to text, you got to call. And then you got Dee, who works with Ground Game, who's going to be on the ground, on the doors, hitting those doors in the midst of COVID. See, everybody ain't, brave enough to do that in COVID, but it means just that much to me. I came out of retirement to make sure that Ground Game is tight.
I want to thank everybody for joining us. Thank you, Reverend Woodall. Thank you, Reverend Dawkins-Haigler. I want to thank all of you. Make sure you also join Rainbow Push Coalition. We'll be coordinating our Get Out the Vote efforts throughout the state of Georgia to stay up to date. Follow us on social media. Visit the website, rainbowpush.org. Make sure you sign up for a membership. There's a lot of work to be done, and we really need your help. And as Reverend Jackson always says, keep hope alive. Thank you.